This is Better Together. Sweet Haven Farm, Sweet Small Town Romance, Book 2. Written by Jessie Gussman. Performed by J. Dice. Episode 12. Chapter 21. Wyatt was not in the room when Harper woke the next morning. Because the room was in the basement and the windows were small and high, the morning sun didn't come in. She couldn't believe it was 10 when she checked her phone. There was a message from Jeff. "Got some good news about this fall. Meet me ASAP." Harper texted back that she could meet Tuesday. They were flying out Monday. His good news would have to wait until then. She should be much more excited about good news from the university. Why wasn't she? She stopped brushing her teeth and stared at her face. It didn't look any different than yesterday. But man, oh day, she felt different. Her skin seemed to glow and her eyes sparkled. After last night, the kiss, not the crevice, she could almost imagine a future with Wyatt. She definitely could imagine kissing him again. "Harper?" Harper's face pinched over her toothbrush. There was no reason for Kayla to be in her room. She took the toothbrush out of her mouth and spit in the sink. "In here." Thankfully, she'd made the bed before she changed her clothes. Someone, Wyatt she assumed, had folded the comforter up and set it at the bottom of the bed along with his pillow. "Hey." Kayla stuck her head in the door. Harper finished rinsing her mouth out and spit in the sink. "Good morning." She met Kayla's dark eyes in the mirror before turning. "I'm sorry I slept in so late." "It was a late night." Kayla's eyes skittered away. She fingered the ends of her shirt. "And stressful." Harper laughed. Kayla's shoulders went up as she took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize for that." "Wyatt said you didn't mean to." She straightened. Harper got the feeling Kayla forced herself to meet Harper's gaze. "I should have gone back." Harper's natural instinct was to forgive and smooth Kayla's conscience. She smiled. "Well, thankfully Wyatt got us out. I was just scared of what I'd see. I didn't want to go back by myself and have you two down there and nothing I could do. If we'd have gone down, I don't think it would have mattered." "Well, I'm sorry." "Hey, no hard feelings. I'll probably never snowmobile with you again, so nothing to worry about." "Aren't you moving back here with Wyatt?" "Oops." We haven't really talked about it much." That, at least, was the truth. Kayla's brows furrowed, but she didn't question farther. Harper hurried to change the subject. For some reason, living the farce for Wyatt didn't feel too much like she was lying, but saying things she knew to be untrue made her feel deceitful. "Wyatt said there was going to be a party tonight." A hum that sounded like a sweeper moving sounded overhead. "Can I help?" "I'm sure you can." Kayla smiled. Then her eyes clouded with uncertainty. "Are we good?" Her finger pointed between the two of them. "Yes, we're fine." Harper smiled reassuringly. "As long as you give me a job and keep me busy so I feel like family and not like a third wheel." "Come on, I'm sure they can use you in the kitchen." Harper nodded and followed Kayla out of the bathroom. Surprisingly, Harper had a great time in the kitchen with Kayla and Sophia. She'd thought they hoped Wyatt dumped her, but at least now she figured they'd want it to happen in the nicest way possible. She hated leaving before the work was done, but she wanted to look good for Wyatt tonight. So after the vegetables were chopped and the trays arranged, she thanked Sophia and went downstairs. After going through 3 changes of clothes, she at last settled on the one skirt she brought that Wyatt had once said looked cute, whatever that meant. She stood in the bathroom, putting the finishing touches on her makeup, wondering if Wyatt was even going to make the party since she hadn't seen him all day, when she looked in the mirror and saw him standing in the open doorway. His face glowed, although there were slight lines around his eyes where his ski goggles had dug into his skin. His cheeks were rosy, even over his tan, and his shoulders broad in his long-sleeved shirt. He still wore snow pants. Her hand froze. Her heart jumped. She forgot to breathe. His lips tilted up, wobbling a little as though he were just as uncertain of the status of their relationship as she was. He swallowed. "Hey." It came out rusty and soft. "Hey yourself." She turned around. "I couldn't stop thinking about you all day." His hands twisted his beanie cap, and he shifted his weight from one leg to the other. She held up her bandaged finger, the product of allowing herself to be distracted by him while chopping vegetables. "I was thinking about you, too." Oh, if only he knew how she'd agonized over her deep desire to be home versus her knowledge that any chance she had of being with Wyatt would require her to move to Chile. Her thoughts had gone round and round all day, but in the end, she came to the same conclusion. If she wanted Wyatt, she would have to give up everything she worked for and leave her home and family. Concern darkened his gaze. He stepped forward and took her hand in his, lowering his head and twisting her hand to see the bandage from all angles. "Are you okay?" She nodded. Her stomach was a mass of curling nerves. This was Wyatt, her best friend, but he made her breathless. He looked back into her eyes, keeping hold of her hand, his thumb slowly stroking. "Man, Harper, I planned to play it cool and follow your lead. I don't want to ruin our friendship." He looked away and blew a breath out, taking another deep one before looking back at her. He swallowed. "Please tell me that you weren't just thinking of me as your best friend, that it was more, that there's more between us than friendship." As his eyes, sincere, pleading, bore into hers, she could only tell the truth. "I was thinking of that kiss. I wanted to do it again." He closed his eyes and groaned softly. Then he dropped her hand and his arms stole around her. He rested his forehead on hers and whispered fiercely, "I've been waiting 10 years to hear you say that." Shock sprang through her body. Her breath puffed out. "What?" His smile was self-effacing as he shook his head, his forehead rolling against hers. "I said, I've waited 10 years to hear you say that." She blinked rapidly, trying to comprehend what he had just said. "I had no idea." "It's the only thing I've ever been able to keep from you." "Why? Why would you have kept it from me?" He pulled his head back and cupped her cheeks with his large hands. "Because you weren't interested. All you saw when you looked at me were elbows and feet." "That's true at first." "Then I was just your step-cousin and we had fun together." "True." "To be fair, though, you were too wrapped up in your books and studying to make time for romance." With that statement, reality crashed down on her. Tenure, the university, his dad. They were headed in completely different directions. There was no way to work their future out. With the party due to start any minute, they didn't have time to discuss it. "Are you going to kiss me?" His square jaw split into a grin. He jerked his head up. "Say it again." "Dang it, Wyatt, kiss me." "My pleasure," he murmured just before his head descended. Their lips met, just as sweet, just as explosive as the first time. When he lifted his head, a long time later, their breaths came in pants. Their eyes met, and they grinned at each other. "I could gladly stand right here and do that all night long," she said. Wyatt ran a hand down her cheek and along her jawline. Her breath hitched. She pushed her face into his hand, loving the contact. "But I'd better get out of here because there's a party in your honor that is supposed to start any minute, and a lot of people have worked all day to make it very nice." Somehow, Harper's hands had gotten under Wyatt's shirt, and she skimmed her palms up and down his back, learning the hard ridges and dips. "Much as I would like to stay here, too." She couldn't believe she'd misread Wyatt for so long. 10 years. He sighed and ran a hand over his face. "I never got a chance to say anything to my dad." "So we have to stage a fight?" At the idea of fighting in front of a room full of people, fear tried to shove its clinging tentacles between them, but she held Wyatt tighter. "Yeah, I don't know. I don't want you looking bad. I guess if an opportunity presents itself." His voice trailed off and he shrugged. Then his eyes narrowed and he met her gaze again. "We need to have a conversation about where this is going." He jerked his chin, indicating the two of them. "Well, tonight after the party, or we're traveling all day tomorrow, going home. We could do it then." "Sometime. I'm not asking you to come here." "And I'm not asking you to stay in Pennsylvania." He grunted. "It might be a short conversation." That was it. No need to talk about it anymore. Still, "Let's not ruin tonight with tomorrow's problems." His eyes crinkled. "It's your brain that has always been so appealing to me." "Yeah, that's what everyone says." She rolled her eyes. "Hurry up and get ready before they come looking for us." She slipped out of his arms and out of the bathroom, shutting the door behind her. Wyatt stood in the great room, holding a glass of water. Icicle lights drooped from the ceiling, and a cheerful fire crackled in the huge stone fireplace. Low-hanging, rustic chandeliers added to the ambiance. People mingled and talked, some attired in classic evening wear, but most dressed in casual but expensive mountain wear. He'd been at parties here before, but somehow everything seemed different tonight. Maybe because this one was in honor of him and his girl. Harper fit right in with the soft brown leather skirt she wore. It was his favorite. He loved how it twirled around her legs, mid-calf, playing peekaboo with the tops of her brown boots. The rich forest green shirt brought out the green in her gray eyes, and her hair, which was normally in a ponytail, lay down her back in a slick, shiny curtain. He wanted to spend the evening staring at her. He also wanted to run his hands through her hair. But he was expected to be the perfect son, mingling, talking, making people feel comfortable and entertaining them with stories from his travels and adventures. On one hand, he was trying to make the party go by without a hitch. On the other, he constantly searched for an opportunity to pretend to have a fight with Harper. Not that he wanted to. What he wanted to do was sit on the couch with her snuggled next to him and bask in the feeling that she finally saw him as more than a friend. He also wanted to hash their future out, to see what kind of compromise they could work out. Harper hadn't said anything, but he knew she was homesick, had been since they drove away from the farm. She longed for home, and he wasn't sure she would be willing to leave it. It wouldn't be right for him to ask her to. Maybe she would offer. "She's glowing." Sophia glided up to him, lifting a brow in Harper's direction. He allowed his eyes to linger where they wanted. "Yeah." "That near-death experience was good for your relationship. When you two first showed up, you were missing that spark of awareness. But now, you definitely look like a man besotted, and she like a woman in love." Wyatt stilled. It seemed impossible, after all the years of waiting and hoping, that Harper could be in love with him. It was what he'd always wanted. Even though he knew a relationship could not happen, it still thrilled him to think that the woman he'd loved for more than a decade might return his feelings. Sophia glanced at the large clock on the wall. He followed her gaze. It was almost 9. "Your father wanted to say a few words. Maybe you can steal Harper away from our neighbors and make your way to the fireplace. That's where he was planning on speaking." "Sure." Wyatt took another sip of his water and moved through the crowd. Nerves balled in his stomach. He should have talked to his dad before this. There really hadn't been time. They'd been busy with guests all day, and the idea of admitting he'd lied was repugnant. He shouldn't have lied to begin with. He reached Harper's side and slipped an arm around her waist, focusing on her warmth and softness, and on how good it was to finally be able to allow everything he felt for her to show on his face. No more worries about ruining their friendship. At least, for now. At some point, they would have to make some hard choices if they couldn't find a compromise. He still couldn't see one. The thought made him clench his jaw. He deliberately loosened the muscles. It wasn't something he was going to think about tonight. Harper looked up into his face. Her smile lit the room, and he allowed his gaze to linger on her face before looking at Mr. and Mrs. Regana, an older couple who lived in the village. "Excuse me, but I need to steal Harper away for a few minutes." Mrs. Regana winked at him. "Only for a few minutes," Mr. Regana said. "She's a nice girl. You did well, son. It's good to have you coming back. You breathe life into this place." "Thanks." Wyatt exchanged a few more pleasantries with them before tugging on Harper's waist and leading her away. "Dad is going to say a few words, and he wants us standing with him." "So it's a good time to pick a fight?" "Yeah, I haven't been able to think of anything to fight over." Harper looked around the room. She had always played by the rules, colored in the lines, and hated causing problems. But she hadn't balked at him asking her to fight, with him, in public. A surge of feeling swept through him, swirling up and warming him from the inside out. Everything she'd done for the last 2 days had been for him. He couldn't describe how that made him feel. Beside him, Harper slid the emerald ring off her finger. "Here." She held it out to him. "Take this so I'm not tempted to throw it at you in the heat of the moment." He laughed, but took the ring, slipping it into his pocket. Harper would never let him keep it, and he wouldn't want to, except it felt like he had a piece of her. He'd love to get a chain and put the ring around his neck where it could hang close to his heart. They met his dad at the fireplace. Wyatt thought to have a few private words first, but his dad held a glass aloft and tapped it with a spoon. "I'd like everyone's attention for just a few moments," his dad said loudly. The hum of conversation faded away. The fire crackled behind them. His dad surveyed the room. "Friends, family, neighbors, guests, thank you so much for coming tonight to celebrate the engagement of my son." He stopped speaking and looked at Wyatt, giving him almost a proud look. "Most of you have seen him grow up." Wyatt didn't allow his smile to slip. People seeing him grow up was a bit of an exaggeration. Wyatt had visited from time to time, but it wasn't like he'd lived here growing up. "So we thought it only fitting to invite you here tonight so you can celebrate with us." His dad turned to him. "Have you decided on a date?" "Not yet." Wyatt kept his forced smile as he looked at his dad, then out over the crowd, giving a little shrug. "Then I propose Saturday, August 31st, here, in this very spot. Anyone here who would like to come is welcome. And rest assured, Wyatt is planning on living here with his new bride. They will both be working at the resort and continuing the family operation." "Wait," Harper said. She turned to Wyatt with big eyes. "We're living here?" A little smile threatened to ruin the impression she gave as she crossed her arms over her chest. It signaled to Wyatt that this was their fight. She flattened her lips in apparent displeasure, and the tilt of her lips disappeared. He dropped his hand from around her waist. "Of course. We're both needed here at the resort." A murmur went through the crowd. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see his dad glower. Harper threw one hand out. "I've got a life in Pennsylvania. I can't just drop it." "You're not dropping it. The date is 2 months away. Plenty of time for you to wrap up loose ends." A titter came from the crowd. He gave what he hoped was an appeasing smile. His dad crossed his arms over his chest. Harper stomped a foot and widened her eyes. "I don't want to wrap up anything. I've got a research position waiting for me, and tenure at the university." She turned to face him, moving her back to the crowd. The room faded away. Wyatt concentrated on Harper. "Oh no, we're not talking about the university again. All you do is talk about tenure and research." "So?" Wyatt racked his brain for fighting words. "So, you know what happened with the garbage can, the hard apple cider, and the mini bulldozer?" Her eyes clearly said she had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. Neither did he, to be honest, since he was totally making it up. But she gamely played along. "Don't you even bring that up again, especially not in front of all these people, because I really don't think that you want them to hear the story of you and the shaving cream and the dinosaur model." She folded her arms across her chest. Her look said, "Top that." "Well, at least I didn't steal your underwear for a school project." Her lips twitched. She spoke louder. "Are you still bitter about that? You never wore them anyway." Oh yeah, he was much better at this than he was at trying to insult Harper. He just had to remember to keep a straight face. "How do you know? And, hello, I have every right to be bitter since you put them on a pumpkin." "It was the best-dressed pumpkin at the homecoming bazaar. I won first place." Harper tapped her foot. Her mouth twitched in time with it. Wyatt bit the insides of his cheeks. Everyone in the crowd knew they were my underwear. No, they didn't. You put my name on them in black permanent marker. He pointed a finger at her. You should have used your own underwear. Harper put her pert little nose in the air. They were perfect, with those little smiling jack-o'-lanterns. Really, you should be thanking me. Because my underwear made the front page of the local paper? They were above the fold, in color. Harper could contain herself no longer, and she laughed, which made Wyatt laugh. She laid her head on his chest and wiped at her eyes. He stroked down her hair, like he'd wanted to do all night, and pulled her closer. Their guests, most of them with big smiles on their faces, some outright laughing, and his dad, had been watching with curiosity. Now the murmur of conversation started back up. His dad turned and addressed the crowd, saying something about talking with the lovebirds, but Wyatt didn't pay attention. He spoke low to Harper. I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry, she said softly when she finally caught her breath. It's my fault. I didn't follow the script, he whispered in her ear. She shook her head. There was no script. True, but I kind of veered off topic with the whole underwear thing. I think I brought it up, Harper said with a lifted brow as though she were asking if he wanted to try another fight. I'll just have to bite the bullet. He glanced up to see his dad had finished talking and had his arms across his chest, scowling at them. Now would probably be a good time. I'll stay here beside you. Wyatt flattened his lips. That's tempting, but I got myself into this without your help. I'd better fix it the same way. Harper shook her head. I'll stay. Confidence surged through him. They smiled at each other. Then Wyatt bent and gently pressed his lips to hers. A cheer went up from the crowd. Wyatt lifted his head. Harper's cheeks brightened. Kinda forgot about our audience, Wyatt said. Me too. Harper squeezed his hand. The crowd dissipated. Wyatt waited until the hum of conversation had grown loud again before he glanced toward his dad, who still glowered at him. With dread weighing his feet, he stepped toward his dad. Harper held tightly to his hand. Sorry about that, Wyatt said. His dad's face didn't change. I'm not sure what that was. Wyatt pulled himself up to his full height. That was me being a coward. Lines appeared in his dad's forehead. He tilted his head. What are you saying? Wyatt swallowed. He needed to face this the same way he'd face a challenging ski course or a difficult mountain to climb, head on. He stuck his chin out. I lied about being engaged. A gasp sounded beside him. He looked over. Sophia and Kayla stood slightly beside and behind him. Sophia had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. Kayla's were narrowed. She looked almost angry. You lied? His dad repeated, low and slow. Yeah. Why? Sophia cried softly as she came up beside him. You can't tell me that you and Harper aren't a couple. Kayla took a step closer, her hands on her hips. Her eyes shifted between Harper and him. We weren't. Wyatt didn't want to have to explain that on top of everything else. He tried to move the topic back. I knew Dad wanted me here. This is where you belong, his dad said. I know, he said, only partly to appease his dad. mostly because he knew it to be true. But Uncle Fink has been recovering from a bad bacterial infection. A muscle in his dad's jaw worked in and out. It throbbed in time with the vein that stood out on his forehead. Wyatt spoke to Sophia. Dad always gets upset when he thinks I'm spending too much time on the farm in Pennsylvania, and I knew that if I told him that Uncle Fink needed me for the summer, he'd be angry. I thought it'd be easier to say that I was engaged and I wanted to stay home to be with my girl. You were afraid, his dad growled. I wanted to help Uncle Fink, and I wanted to keep the peace. I don't know why you'd think that you should help on that farm. It's not yours. Not like this resort. His dad threw his arm out, indicating everything around them. Wyatt leveled his gaze at his dad. He opened his mouth, and words that he'd wanted to say but hadn't for 10 years fell out. Uncle Fink took me in when you didn't want to be bothered with me. His dad's jaw set. I was busy building our future. I'm sorry for needing a father at an inconvenient time. His dad had the grace to look slightly abashed. Wyatt's heart softened. No one could change the past, but the future was wide open. Still, now wasn't the time to fight about it. Not with a house full of people. And his dad might never change. That was a part of love, accepting the person his dad was, imperfections and all. Because, deep down, he was sure his father loved him. He just expressed that love through money. That's all some people were capable of. It wasn't Wyatt's place to change him. It was only his place to love him. That still doesn't explain you and Harper. You two are in love. Sophia stepped to David's side and slipped an arm around him. She smiled gently at Harper. Wyatt wanted to look at Harper's face to see what she thought of that statement, but he resisted. We are not engaged. She's a friend. What I'm trying to find out, Sophia interrupted, is what the status of your relationship is. Maybe there is an actual possibility of Harper coming here? Of you two getting married? Wyatt wished there were. If only, if only, if only. But wishing didn't make it so. No. Sophia's lips pressed together, but she didn't argue. I'm coming down here. Harper finally spoke. I have a job in Pennsylvania, a research position. The university is voting on my tenure later this summer. Wyatt nodded. Hearing it from her lips was harder than he'd thought. It would be the height of selfishness for me to ask her to give all that up. If only she would. As little as he knew about relationships, he realized that if she were to come to Chile, she had to do it because she wanted to, not because he asked. He was afraid that noble idea wouldn't keep him from asking, begging, really. But look at what you have here. His dad spread his arm out again, like the resort was the only thing that mattered. Look at what she'd gain by choosing you. Wyatt shrugged. It would have to be her choice. For some people, it's not about the money and the bling. Harper squeezed his hand, and a glimmer of why the farm in Pennsylvania felt like home tickled through his brain. There wasn't a lot of money there, but there was a lot of love. Some things were worth more than money, more than success in business. So, basically, you're saying that you aren't engaged, and Harper won't be coming down here with you? Sophia glanced at Kayla, who had her arms crossed over her chest, and her lips pressed together in a flat line. Yeah, basically. So this is no longer an engagement party? His dad asked. Guilt pinched Wyatt's chest. He put his hands in his pockets and shuffled his feet. No. I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth to begin with. I hope I never do anything like that again. Sophia nudged David. He looked away before saying, It's okay, son. That must be his dad's way of saying he was forgiven. He was surprised it was that easy, but Sophia's presence had a way of mellowing his dad's rough edges. Wyatt figured he'd better be completely honest. I do want to wait until Uncle Fink comes home, just to make sure he's okay. Then I'll be down. 2 weeks, maybe. His dad ground his teeth together. Sophia elbowed him again. You have to be okay with that, David. It's fear of your reaction that caused him to lie in the first place. No, it was a lack of character on my part that caused me to lie. I can't guarantee that I've magically grown character overnight, but I hope I've at least started the process. No matter what Dad's reaction is, I need to be man enough to tell the truth. That's impressive, son. He glanced at Sophia as though checking to be sure he was saying the right thing. I'm still expecting you to come here permanently as soon as Fink is better. I'm expecting that too. Sophia spoke low, looking from one to the other. Maybe you and Harper could continue to be engaged. After all, this is an engagement party, until after you leave Monday. Wyatt didn't say anything. He was tired of the lies. Sophia smiled appealingly at him. It will allow your dad to save face tonight. We'll just let the news of your breakup trickle out naturally when you come down to stay. I think that's a good idea, Wyatt. Harper nudged him with her shoulder. His dad cleared his throat. Great. Now, there's a lot of people here to talk to, even if you're not engaged. And there's a lot of food to eat. We've got a party going on. Let's go enjoy it. Wyatt nodded, then looked around for Harper. He felt like a bowling ball had been removed from his body. The decorations looked brighter, the people around him happier, and, for himself, he was eager to move on. With Harper. Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great audiobook, here's one we think you might like. Or check out the playlist with all our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Say with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.